It was Nijmegen.
It was after Nijmegen.
It was the single road. And the fog.
Operation Market Garden failed because the tanks of 30 Corps did not reach the Powers in Arnhem in time. But why?
While there's plenty out there on the airborne side of the operation, there's far less analysis of the British armoured column that some believe let the side down.
But is that fair?
Our orders are to wait for the infantry.
Or had they, like the airborne forces, been thrown into an equally impossible situation?
I'm sorry, but there it is.
In this video, we're going to examine 6 of the key reasons why it all went wrong for the tanks on Hell's Highway.
And why we don't think there was anything else they could have done.
Gentlemen, this is a story that you will tell your grandchildren.
Nijmegen, September the 20th, 1944. D+3 of Operation Market Garden. In an act of suicidal courage, paratroopers of the US 82nd Airborne crossed the River Waal in flimsy canvas boats under murderous fire.
They successfully storm and secure the northern bank of the river so that the column of tanks can move across Nijmegen Bridge towards their objective.
The Sherman tanks of a Guards Armoured Division begin to cross, but they quickly encounter resistance, with several tanks knocked out.
They halt until their infantry support arrives, which it does 14 hours later. The paratroopers of the 82nd, however, who had suffered heavy losses taking the bridge in the first place, are absolutely furious.
This moment is dramatised in the 1977 film A Bridge Too Far, giving rise to the impression that the 30 Corps were too cautious, lacking urgency and drive to reach their objective.
But in truth, it didn't matter, because at this point, it was already over.
Up the road in Arnhem, the British 1st Airborne Division had held out for 3 days and 9 hours against superior forces. They couldn't hold out any longer. The Guards Armoured Division should have been there 24 hours ago, and they were still over 10 miles away.
Operation Market Garden had failed. But it wasn't down to the failure of the troops on the ground, and it certainly wasn't a lack of urgency from the tank crews. So what went wrong?
We're going to fly 35,000 men 300 miles and drop them behind enemy lines. Quite frankly, this kind of thing's never been attempted before.
The plan was the problem. It was far too ambitious, and it relied on everything going precisely as planned and to timetable. And that never happens in wartime. By September 1944, that's 3 months after D-Day, the Allies advanced as far as the Belgian-Dutch border here. Operation Market Garden relied on a huge flanking manoeuvre, cutting through Holland and into the Ruhr, the industrialised areas of northern Germany. Now, in order to do that, bridges across the Maas, the Waal, and the Niederrhein, 3 major rivers, plus a whole mass of other smaller waterways, had to be captured intact. The US 101st Airborne would be dropped at Eindhoven to secure the crossings here. The US 82nd Airborne would do the same job at Nijmegen, and then further south, the British 1st Airborne with the Polish Independent Parachute Brigade would take and hold the bridge across the Niederrhein at Arnhem. Simultaneously, British 30 Corps, spearheaded by Guards Armoured, would cross the Belgian-Dutch border here and then drive north to relieve each of the airborne units in turn, according to a strict timetable.
Sounds straightforward enough, but the tanks were being asked to cover 65 miles in 48 hours up a single exposed road deep in enemy territory. The challenge was moving over 800 tanks, trucks, armoured cars and other vehicles more than 30 miles a day.
For context, in 1940 the German army advanced around 150 miles in 46 days. That's just 3 miles a day against an opposition that was in complete collapse, and without being constrained by the need to follow a single route.
Nothing like this, on this scale and under these conditions, had been attempted before, and it was a massive ask of the men and their machines.
Our job is to punch a hole through the German front line here, and then drive like hell up this road, linking up with each airborne division on the way up.
Yes, it was bold and optimistic, but it was also high risk and the timetable left no margin for error. And that is what makes it so unusual.
The plan was proposed by Field Marshal Montgomery, who had built a reputation for himself as a thorough and cautious commander whose reliance on meticulous planning had brought him success.
So this plan was completely out of character.
But it was approved by General Eisenhower commanding SHAEF, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. He had also considered a plan submitted by Monty's rival, General Patton, who advocated for a direct drive across the Rhine towards Berlin. There were good reasons for Eisenhower to favour Monty's plan. Firstly, German arms production in the industrial heartland was actually going up at the time, under the oversight of Albert Speer and his significant use of slave labour, so there was a strategic desire to take these factories out. Secondly, Eisenhower would have known that Berlin, the objective of Patton's plan, would have been ceded to Stalin at the Yalta Conference that divided up post-war Germany, so he knew that a drive on Berlin would be a waste of lives and effort if they simply be handing it over to the Red Army anyway.
So it was Monty's plan that got the green light. And, as we'll see, it was doomed to fail.
The planners massively underestimated the strength of the enemy the Allies would be facing, and this would have disastrous consequences for the integrity of the plan.
Yes, I shouldn't worry about them.
Allied opinion by late August was that the Wehrmacht were on the brink of collapse, having been forced backwards hundreds of miles in 6 weeks. The Allied advance across northwest Europe up to this point had been deceptively straightforward, albeit costly. The destruction of the German 5th and 7th Armies at the Falaise Pocket had only happened about 3 weeks before, followed by the rapid advance across northern France and Belgium that became known as the Great Swan.
These things seem to have created a sense of complacency, because in truth, German forces were regrouping quickly. In a major stroke of misfortune of the Allies, the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions, who'd fought a rearguard action through northwest Europe, had been moved into the Arnhem area to refit. Their presence had either not been detected or had been ignored by military intelligence.
But this time the party's on, and no one is going to call it off.
As a result, the Allied forces would find themselves unexpectedly facing around 8,000 veteran SS troops, including units specifically trained to combat airborne operations.
So before the tanks of 30 Corps had even started their engines, their odds of success had fallen, with an enemy opposition considerably greater than they had anticipated. And their advance would lead them directly into trouble.
How the hell do they expect us to keep to schedule on a road like this?
You don't know the worst. This bit we're on now, it's the wide part.
The main route of the advance towards Arnhem would be a single, mostly straight and relatively narrow road, which, due to the geography of the area, would often be raised up above the level of the surrounding countryside. Marsh, sandy heathland or forest either side of the route would frequently make off-road manoeuvre difficult, if not impossible. An ambush from the flanks with anti-tank weapons was inevitable, something the Sherman would be especially vulnerable to. This was far from ideal tank country, particularly in a cumbersome column of 800 vehicles. Progress along such a predictable route would be frustrated and slowed by roadblocks, pre-zeroed artillery, and camouflaged defensive positions.
This is exactly what happened, and it gave the troops a taste of things to come in a preliminary operation to clear out the final few miles towards their intended start line.
With flanking movements prevented by the terrain, the Germans' disciplined defensive tactics meant that each enemy position had to be cleared by infantry, costly in lives and in time.
We don't know why commanders didn't think they might meet similar conditions further up the road and adapt accordingly. It's worth pointing out that 30 Corps were not green. They were a capable and battle-hardened formation comprising the Guards Armoured Division, 2 infantry divisions, and attached artillery and logistics formations. The Guards Armoured Division were formed from the British Army's elite Foot Guards regiments, converted to armour, and had fought their way from Normandy.
The tank in most frequent use of the division was this one, the M4 Sherman. If you're interested in this tank, we've just released this. It's the Tank Museum Guide to the Sherman. It's a comprehensive guide to its history, development and production. And it's available to order now from our online shop,
where every purchase helps us look after our collection. And of course, if you're enjoying this video, please give us a like. It helps to get our videos to the widest possible audience. Guards Armoured were equipped with a mix of standard 75mm armed gun tanks, like this one, and 1 in 4 17-pounder British modified Fireflies. The 75mm armed tanks fired a good HE round, so they could deal with infantry. The Fireflies were there to deal with enemy armour.
This Firefly has the divisional markings of Guards Armoured Division and is badged up as the first tank to cross the Vaal Bridge at Nijmegen. The reliability and relative comfort of the Sherman made it an ideal tank for such a road run. That being said, it does have a very high profile and particularly weak side armour. Here at the Sponsons, there's only 38mm of armour, and on the 75mm gun tank version, ammunition was stored right behind it, making it an ideal target for anti-tank gunners. This led to the Sherman getting a reputation of being a tank that could burn easily. That being said, literally any tank is going to burn if it's hit in the right place. An advance along a single predictable route with lots of cover meant that the possibility of an ambush was constant.
An attack from the side represented a considerable danger.
No one expected a joyride, but the column would clearly be facing a difficult journey on Hell's Highway when they set off on Sunday the 17th of September 1944.
Speed is the vital factor.
The paratroops would need to be relieved quickly, so the entire operation was a race against time. But the underestimation of the enemy's strength made that crucial timetable hopelessly unrealistic. From the moment the operation began on the 17th of September, the tanks of the Guards Armoured Division were facing organised and determined defenders. The enemy, Kampfgruppe Walter, were waiting, dug in with infantry, anti-tank guns and self-propelled guns like the Stug, covering sections of the road. A weapon that could have been designed for this type of fighting, the Sturmgeschütz III, was the most prolific tank killer of the war. Based on the Panzer III with a powerful 75mm gun, its low profile made it an ideal ambush weapon. Firing from a hull-down position in roadside cover, the Stug could wreak havoc on the long column of British armour and transport. Just 11 minutes after they crossed the start line, an ambush knocked out the rear 3 tanks of the lead squadron and the first 6 of the following squadron. Rocket-firing Typhoons and infantry were needed to clear the enemy positions, and it wasn't until armoured bulldozers had pushed the wrecks from the road that the columns were able to move again. This first battle had cost 2 hours, time that no one, least of all the Paras, could afford.
For 30 Corps, this was pretty much how the whole operation would pan out, as the enemy conducted a textbook fighting retreat. By nightfall, on the first day, the lead elements of Guards Armoured barely covered 10 miles. They were 10 to 15 miles behind schedule, and they'd only just reached Valkenswaard here. It's only about 10 miles from the Belgian border. The difficulties of continually starting and stopping and bringing fuel and supplies forward to the lead elements cannot be underestimated.
Driver fatigue, overheating engines, traffic jams, waiting. Each individual issue might only lead to a short delay, but add in the fact that World War II armour couldn't move at night, and this would all add up against a schedule that hadn't allowed for any of it.
Weather has a habit of hindering even the best made plans, so it can be disastrous when it comes to bad ones.
It's very slippery stuff, fog. I mean, do you think you've got it, and then it reverses itself and leaves you behind?
As dawn broke on the 18th, D+2, a massive layer of fog covered the landscape. The air support that proved vital in dealing with opposition the previous day would not now be available.
It also meant the Paras, who were involved in desperate fighting themselves, couldn't be resupplied.
With poor visibility, the progress of 30 Corps was even slower, with reconnaissance difficult and constant contact with supporting infantry being essential. As the second day came to an end, it had become clear that any attempt to make up for lost time had now completely evaporated, and the implications of this weren't lost on any of them, but they simply couldn't go any faster.
By the end of D+1, the German High Command had grasped the Allied plan and they'd begun to mount a coherent response. They knew the route the Allies were taking, and they knew their objectives. To stop them, all they had to do was cut the road. Under the cover of bad weather, German reinforcements were rushed into the area.
In another stroke of bad fortune for the Allies, the 107th Panzer Brigade, what could be called a pocket panzer division of 40 Panther tanks, was in the area about to entrain for Aachen.
Instead, they were diverted, along with Sturmgeschütz Brigade 280, towards the road that would become known as Hell's Highway.
The Panther itself was probably the most technologically advanced tank of the war, an excellent high-velocity 75mm gun and highly effective sloped armour, but had been rushed into production and was plagued with mechanical issues. Oil leaks from engine gaskets and leaking fuel pumps led to engine fires, plus transmission and final drive problems meant that the Panther was highly unreliable. 107th Panzer Brigade, having been deployed without its recovery and workshop unit, would find tank serviceability a major problem in the coming days, but were still able to make a nuisance of themselves.
Carrying out a recce, the brigade commander, Major Feuer van Baltzheim, saw a stream of vehicles crossing the Bailey Bridge over the Wilhelmina Canal at Sonn, here. They were part of the logistics column of Guards Armoured. If he could destroy that bridge, it would cut off Guards Armoured from the rest of 30 Corps. But von Maltzan was hampered by the ground. Limited approach routes meant that he couldn't bring his full force to bear. So he was forced to mount a limited attack and did knock out an ammunition truck actually on the bridge itself. But after that, he was forced to withdraw when he lost one of his Panthers to a bazooka team from the 101st Airborne and another to an anti-tank gun.
At the same time, Cromwell's of the 15th to 19th Hussars, with men of Easy Company, 2nd 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, riding aboard, ran into Panthers of the 107th Flank Guard. This cost the 15th to 19th one Cromwell destroyed and another damaged. The action is depicted in the HBO series Band of Brothers.
I believe you, but if I can't see the bugger, I can't bloody well shoot him, can I?
As a tank, the Cromwell, which was used by armoured reconnaissance regiments, in the case of 30 Corps 2nd Welsh Guards, was liked by its crews for its speed and mobility, a major advantage during the Great Swan. But it was a little under-armoured and undergunned, certainly compared to a Panther. The Cromwell was powered by the Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, which gave it a top speed of over 40 miles an hour. The Merit brand transmission also meant that it could turn at speed with both tracks under power, unlike the Sherman, which had to slow down to turn. Against that, it was cramped, and the 75mm gun, derived from the British 6-pounder, didn't have particularly good penetrative power against armour. The Glacier armour is 3 inches, that's 76mm thick. Now that's thicker than that of a Sherman, but it's vertical rather than sloped, so that is less good protection in frontal engagements.
The next morning, 107th Panzer Brigade's next attempt at frustrating the attackers would result in the first ever tank battle on Dutch soil. Charlie Company of 2nd 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, with 2 anti-tank guns, a platoon of engineers, 30 company clerks, and with the support of 6 Cromwell tanks from the 15th and 19th Hussars, held off an attack from Fallschirmjäger and 6 Panther tanks of von Maltzan's Panzer Brigade.
One company, supported by 6 tanks, had driven off a much larger force and taken 85 prisoners. This was not all one-way traffic.
In fact, von Maltzan was heavily criticised in being overly cautious, wishing to preserve his command, where more determined attempts could have destroyed the bridge and brought an early end to the operation.
With the enemy mounting a much more coherent response, the element of surprise had been well and truly lost, and an SS battle group was advancing south from Arnhem towards the head of the column. It had been the intention that 30 Corps would relieve the British Paras at Arnhem on D+2, but by D+3 they were still at Nijmegen, still 10 miles short.
Now the British Paras were in a very precarious position, surrounded and cut off on the wrong side of the river. Even as the 82nd Airborne launched their legendary assault across the Wyle, the plan had completely unravelled.
Because without the Arnhem Bridge, Market Garden was a complete failure.
For Christ's sake, must you do everything by the book? Our orders are to wait for the infantry.
The famous scene from the movie A Bridge Too Far depicts a furious Major Julian Cook of 82nd Airborne ripping in to an officer of Guards Armoured. Given what they'd just achieved in taking the Nijmegen Bridge, his men were understandably riled to see British tanks cross the bridge and then just park up.
We busted our asses getting here. Half my men are killed, and you're just gonna stop and drink tea?
The British officer fires back that his tanks can't go forward without infantry support.
Look, we're now facing a completely different situation. We can't leave with tanks up that road. Jerry will pick us off like sitting ducks. Our infantry are still fighting in Nijmegen. When they get here, we'll move on.
Based on everything 30 Corps had experienced up to this point, he was absolutely right. It simply would have made a bad situation worse. And we shouldn't fall into the trap of blaming 30 Corps of complacency or poor performance when analysing why Operation Market Garden failed.
Their mission was impossible. 65 miles in 48 hours up a single exposed road was asking far too much of the men and their machines.
The German forces opposing 30 Corps couldn't completely halt the advance as the numbers were too firmly stacked in the Allies' favour.
But each delay, each ambush, each blown bridge meant the traffic jams in the column grew, the timetable fell further behind, and the possibility of success ebbed further away.
No amount of heroism by the US, British and Polish airborne forces or of 30 Corps could salvage a plan that was so ill-conceived.
Who was to blame? Montgomery would always maintain that, given the proper support, Market Garden could have succeeded.
It's not clear exactly what he meant by this, and it's difficult to support his view. Either way, responsibility for the failure of Market Garden sits very squarely on his shoulders. But what do you think?
Well, as you'll know, I've always thought that we tried to go a bridge too far.
But what do you think? Let us know in the comments below.
And if you did enjoy this video, please do consider giving it a like, as it means a tremendous amount to us and it will help YouTube push these educational videos to new audiences.
We'd like to thank our Patreon supporters and YouTube members for their ongoing support. If you'd like to join them and receive benefits such as early access to videos, behind the scenes at the museum, and an exclusive monthly Q&A with Chris Copson, check the links in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, you'd probably also enjoy this one, and this one.